I'm talking about screens today and screen time here with a bent of how it affects families in a sort of different take. All kinds of things from laptops to virtual reality. The key to understand about screens is they're really key enablers. And it's gotten so we call our devices screens. Increasingly, the only thing you can see when you look at a device is a screen. It's the most expensive component in any device. It's the most power-hungry component in a device. It's what enabled the last 30 years of consumer electronics, from the laptop, the invention of the liquid crystal display, made portable electronics, the mobile phone with a wide viewing angle, integrated touch screen, virtual reality with the high resolution screens and optics in front of us, and increasingly the screen is the device. And yet so many of us, when we learn about consumer electronics, there's this focus on the industrial design and the styling of the housing. Super important, people buy on it, but you know, the inside's pretty important too. 70% of our brains are allocated to processing visual images. We get a lot of the information into our heads and we deal with it through screens. And I fell in love with screens when I was a little kid and flashing colored lights, so that's what I do. There's not a lot of competition in doing innovative screens, sadly. Too many of the screen companies actually make pretty much identical, the same thing, and then compete on price and lose money. And there's, right now, as I look for what I'm making for the next devices, I run displays for Facebook and for Oculus. You have to look at what the factory infrastructure is. So I'm sorry, this is a little bit of a techie slide, but it's really key. If you plot the kinds of technology on a bar graph, as I have here, the thing in blue is liquid crystal display. There's $400 billion of sunk costs in factory infrastructure throughout the 4 countries in the world that make screens: China, Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. And so if you want to make screens, if you want to make devices, all the devices have screens. You have to look and say, well, what's in the fab and how can we use it to make something way more innovative? So that's what I do. So for the last 20 years, I've been using these kinds of fabs to make really, really innovative optoelectronics and displays that were seemingly impossible by rethinking the basic physics and a lot of sleeping on the factory floor of the world to pioneer not just new components, but the new product and the whole thing by rethinking the physics. So, since this is the Kids Summit, what really drove me a decade ago, and it's really interesting, a decade ago, we launched 1 laptop per child. I co-founded 1 laptop per child to try to get laptops to all children. Because, you know, here's a startling fact. If we care about the future, do we all care about the future? We all care about the future. You're here at the FITS. It's the kids, right? 97% of adolescents live in the developing world, right? And so many of them don't get the opportunity to go to school. Over 100 million kids are not in school. Hundreds of millions of kids drop out of school. 800 million people worldwide are illiterate. They can't read. If they could learn how to read, the chances of pulling them out of poverty are tremendous. And yet, with all the humanitarian funding we have, so little of it, less than 2%, goes to education. There's not, you think, well, maybe it's not a big problem, the people are hungry, blah, blah, blah. You can't solve any problem without education, and the tools of our time, we're sitting here at the Consumer Electronics Show, the tools of our time are consumer electronics. And so how do we use those to help transform education? So I did that, and I started this as a professor with another professor, Nicholas Negroponte, who's pictured there next to the then Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, when we launched my hand-soldered prototype 10 years ago at the UN Summit on the Digital Divide in Africa, in Tunisia. And to that, we heard such negative responses from the titans of industry, from Bill Gates, from Steve Jobs, from Michael Dell, both publicly and privately, deriding us But we kept going and achieved the impossible. We had 100 million kids. It became the laptop I designed and architect led to catalyzed netbooks, which became the fastest growing consumer electronics category ever recorded, generating $30 billion of revenue for some of the very companies that tried to stop us. So we won. This is circa about 5 years ago. After the jokes and hilarity, we got the world to help. I leveraged the huge manufacturing infrastructure of Asia, making brand new components of screens and power management architecture, new software, new operating system that allowed children to start, even though they don't know how to read yet. How do you get going? So we leveraged thousands of people to help us do this. I was the chief technology officer, so I led the architecture of this and getting it into high volume mass production with tons and tons of thousands of very talented people. So this innovation, and the reason I'm talking to you today, this innovation was actually enabled by brand new screen technology, which led to huge savings in the rest of the cost structure. We drove basically the price of laptops down from $1,000 to $2,000, as was standard about a decade ago, to $100 by very clever design of the screen and the motherboard, and then plastic low-cost housing and so forth. Yet the plastic low-cost housing won many design awards, the things in the Museum of Modern Art. It's, you can do a lot with plastic that looks cool. But more key than the cost even, as I spent more and more time in the developing world, was the power decrease. So how do you make something, a piece of consumer electronics, when you're aware that half of the world's children live without steady, ready access to electricity? Like, basically, it's a brick. It's not a laptop, it's a brick if you can't recharge it. And I don't know, have any of you guys ever had your cell phone run out of batteries? Ever? Like, everybody wants this technology. You go through airports and people are sitting on the floor next to wherever the power outlet is because the batteries don't last long enough. So key for lots of things. And also the kids, I needed to design a new laptop because these kids that I was designing for often lived in one room with their family, and more than even in the US where we are now, in the rich countries, there many of us here in the audience are from, when you live in one room, the kids are told to go outside and play. And so they could go outside and work if the screen was sunlight readable, which they are on this laptop. It's 10 years old now. Retinal resolution way before Apple video and so forth. So did all that, two professors doing a startup. And so I've kept going. Here's the use, first kind of consumer electronics in remote parts of the world, a window on the world for people living there, access and opportunity for the entire village. So we deployed these in, 200 countries globally. Every child in Uruguay has one of these things, half the kids in Peru. Lots of other deployments by us and the efforts that competed with us to save the world. We set up a not-for-profit to just catalyze and make the thing happen. But 10 years later, boy, did we win. From the thing that Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Michael Dell, Craig Barrett all thought was impossible to $20 tablets. You can go to Alibaba right now and order them en masse. And ministries of education globally are in most countries, because they're cheaper than textbooks and they allow much more access to information. China and India have pledged to bring every child a device by 2020. So from 10 years ago, crazy idea to, that was obvious, or not obvious, but it was an awful hard work, but they fight you and so forth, but eventually you win. But the key thing is education impact. So what about the test scores, and how are laptops doing in the classroom and so forth? And there's been a lot of discussion about this, but we were really focused in this effort on the least developed countries. we're the 100 million kids that don't get to go to school. How can we reach them? And so here's a picture of a couple of villages we put not even our tablets into. We started to make tablets too at 1 laptop per child. But we put them into these villages and that had no consumer electronics, no record of any written language, just oral languages. This was in Ethiopia, in the highlands of Ethiopia. And the kids figured out how to turn on these tablets, and within months, the tablets were passing literacy tests that had a 50,000 to 1 chance of being passed by random entry. Let me say that again. The tablets were passing literacy tests. 800 million people in the world are illiterate. The tablets were passing literacy tests that had a 50,000 to 1 chance of being passed through random entry, which means we're close. We're close to making consumer electronics that are self-discoverable and readable. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about VR and how we push that even further in terms of usability. But this is happening. It's exciting. But I promised Robin to talk about kind of all screens and what's going on kind of at the high end. And as I look around the show, you see a lot of screens. You go to Central Hall, these gorgeous, huge screens. And those are coming. Those are coming to not just VR on your head, but also what about the walls and screens on all surfaces? And it's becoming affordable and doable now in the next few years. And I just think that we can feel this sense of immersion through that. We can have a shared wall so we can communicate with a family. Everybody can have $1 million view. We can have ambient information. You can change your decorations, your million photos that are on the cloud can then become visible and arranged on a wall. And we can move towards the holodeck. And we see a lot of tiled screens with the bezels in between them. And this is work I did at another company that I can't talk about, but the patents are public, where you can basically erase the bezels so you can just tile screens seamlessly to make any size screen that you want to. And this picture sort of explains how you do it. You magnify different pixel groups. The pixels go to the edge of each tile. Super low cost. Right now, with that $400 billion of factory infrastructure that's across those 4 countries in Asia, we're down to the cost of, that is about $20 a square foot, that screen there, $20 a square foot. A picture window's $40 a square foot. That $20 a square foot, it was $40 a square foot a year ago, so it's headed south, it's headed down, to the point where you can consider putting up larger area systems and transforming things. So the other sort of movement in screens is in I believe, in zero power. If you really look at where, has anybody, I think I asked before, but the battery issue is something that we hear a lot about, wireless charging and just a bunch of different charging methods, little solar panels and things in your sneaker and so forth to charge things. The problem is they don't create enough power to actually give enough juice to this thing. And so what we have to do is also dramatically lower the power consumption of our mobile devices. And if you look here, that means one thing. You have to lower the power consumption of the screen. The reason, I mean, in the late 90s, I had that standard Nokia phone. It was gray plastic. It flipped out. The battery would last for a week on that. But now, we don't even last a day here in Las Vegas. And so the reason is the display got better, but the power consumption went through the roof. About 1% to 2% of the light from the backlight of the screen gets to the front. That's wasting 99% of the light. There's more clever architectures. We can lower the power consumption of the screen by 100-fold. In fact, I did that a decade ago in the lowest cost laptop ever made, and then I created a startup that pushed that further. But that's a super key thing to do if we want to have more devices. as we look at the world of 2020, not just the people in this room, but everyone will have about 10 devices per person. It's just a charging nightmare when you get home every night to charge up your devices unless we lower the power draw. And then the environmental impact and so forth. Also, it makes the consumer electronics last longer because you don't need things like special types of capacitors that have pretty low life. And so we can increase the lifetime of the device and dramatically lower the pain of having to charge it all the time and up the utility, particularly in the developing world. You in this room have a choice. You've got power at home. It's on all the time unless there's a freak storm. But that's not how most of the world lives. And so to bring the rest of the world on, we have to deal with the realities of those situations. So where are we going? The device really is becoming the screen. It's true right now in mobile, and we are moving to foldable, flexible, wearable screens that talk to the cloud with machine learning and big data store in the cloud, where your device is your screen, which creates images, but also senses. So it's a sensing and feeling type thing, a bit like our senses versus our brain, but the brain can be off through wireless transmission. So really where we're going in terms of screens are these areas leveraging the sunk infrastructure in Asia, because otherwise, like, you can't compete with $20 a square foot. People are just going to keep buying that stuff unless we figure out better ways to use that sunk infrastructure cost in Asia. And if you think about when you're designing a new product, and I design a lot of new products, you look at, you could build a couple $1 billion fab, and that would take you how many years? And to 5, and then maybe use that fab to another couple years to ship a product, 7 years to ship a product? I don't think so. You have to use the existing manufacturing infrastructure. So you look at a lot of people saying, oh, well, why don't we make it in America or any other country I happen to be giving a talk in? And I say, well, there's the $400 billion. So you don't have a fab, they have $400 billion of fabs. And they actually are selling things. Usually, a lot of people think the best technology wins. We all probably have read a bunch of books about tech and realize that's not true. The best business wins. But not when governments are involved, and governments trump that. And so the China 5-year plan says, we're going to take over display. And Taiwan and Japan and Korea have their response. But they're competing to own display or continue to own display because it's the single most expensive component in any device, and they all have them. And so that's why manufacturing ends up being in Asia, unless we decided to do that. But we used to do that, but it's been decades since we did that here. And in fact, we don't even have any display engineering majors in this country, nor the entire Western Hemisphere, nor have we ever had one. So we have a lot of computer science majors, so we do computer science here. So that, they're just choices, but we have made those choices. So I sort of have this peripatetic lifestyle where I span the Pacific Ocean, as do many of my colleagues that do a lot of hardware. We go back and forth, we learn Chinese, we learn Japanese, and we work on it. But this is really what's coming. The device is the screen. And we see that in VR. So I recently joined Facebook. I left Google, where I was helped start Google X, and reported to one of the founders of Google, Sergey Brin, and ran some stealth moonshot projects. But Mark Zuckerberg and the team at Oculus made me just an unbelievable offer. So I came and I joined Oculus last March, and we've shipped 2 products. One yesterday, this a few months ago with Samsung. This is the Gear VR for $99. You plug in, actually I have a Samsung phone. You plug in this phone and you have this immersive experience. Now, what's different about this, I think, was best articulated by a really good friend of mine who's a computer graphics pioneer. He won an Academy Award. And he was over his mother's house one Sunday, about 2 months ago. And they were having brunch, Sunday brunch. And he walked into the kitchen, And his mother had a Google Cardboard with a cell phone in it and was touring Paris. His 83-year-old mother. This guy, my friend, has known his mother his whole life, and she's not an early adapter for technology. He usually has to figure out all this stuff for her so she can use her laptop or her cell phone. But she had gotten the Google Cardboard with the New York Times the previous Sunday, put it together, got her mobile phone in there, and was in Paris, and knew what to do. In like having to learn the strokes or the keyboard or typing, in virtual reality, you're just there. You're there, you're present, and it's obvious how to get around. It's like interacting with the real world. And that's what's so different about virtual reality. And yes, I shipped virtual reality systems in the 90s. Good friends of mine founded other virtual reality companies. I've been in and around it for decades. But what's different is being able to do this with mobile phones. Now, I'm working on things I can't talk about today at Oculus, but what the next generations really look like and what they can do that are, obviously even better than this. But we're really proud of this. And yesterday, our more higher-end experience, the Oculus Rift, went on sale for $599. Now, this plugs into a desktop tower that we bundle together, this and the desktop tower, for $1,500. And it may sound expensive, but give it a try. You're here at CES. We're on the floor. There's a lot of virtual reality here. Give it a try, because just even a minute in it, if you haven't tried it, to give it to put it on, you'll be amazed. And so that is just such an exciting thing to finally be able to realize this at consumer price points and bring it to everybody, so that we can be anywhere with anyone. We can be in a video game or swimming in the ocean or immersed with friends. Mark Zuckerberg wants everybody in Facebook, in VR, as soon as possible. It'll take a few years, because this is just the start. So we're moving forward on that, and it's so exciting. There's a lot of areas that need to come together. Obviously, new screens and new optics are fundamental to creating a new kind of experience. Moving towards sunglasses VR should allow the kind of mass adaptation that we want. But right now, we're getting going with these devices, and the excitement is incredible and palpable. So, in summary, I'm sorry I gave you a bit of a tech talk, but I just really think people should know about screens, because they are the devices. The screens are how we interact with the devices. We call them screens. We call it screen time. And there's two kinds of futures. And the kind of past has been treating the screen kind of like glowing DRAM, which is the stuff in your USB stick that you just buy, 64 gigabytes or 32 gigabytes or whatever, and it's just standard. It's in your USB. That's how the industry has worked as a subcomponent. But if you design the component and the product together, the future is so exciting. We can do the rollable, foldable, titleable, the sensors in the room. Just anything can be made out of these screens, and that is the device. It's key for the future of virtual reality. But when we wear things, so also it's not like those kinds of screens are going to go away. They're getting better too. A lot of devices are getting better, and they're enabled by a lot of the same factory technology. So I guess I've talked enough, but pardon? Never? No. So I guess one of the things when Robin asked me to talk to you today is I just really wanted to explain that tablets, we really are getting devices to all children in the world. And 10 years ago, people really did laugh at us and think it was a hilarious joke. And by coming and talking to people about the hilarious joke of it, it made it happen, because nothing happens alone. And so I'm explaining this a bit to you, and it's a bit technical, but like we so much of how we think is related to the visual, auditory. I love sound too, but so much of information comes in through visual that the screen is key, and just buying off-the-shelf components isn't going to lead us to that future, custom designing them well. And thank you for listening, and thank you for your time.